Hi, everybody. It's Michelle Jackson. I'm here to talk with another amazing author from the Black Writers Workspace page. I just wanted to welcome everyone to this series. We have been interviewing authors for quite a while now, and I'm super excited about it. It's so much fun. And I'm just happy to have this opportunity to meet with so many creative minds, people who are sharing with us about how they wrote their book, why they wrote their book, how they publish, and how they're marketing. But more than anything, they're sharing with us the passion and the inspiration behind the work. And as a writer, I am also a self-published author of 2 books. I know how hard writers work to get it right, to make sure that they can tell a story or to create a non-fictional scenario where we can be engaged as readers and we can be enlightened by their own experiences. So I am so excited to be here. It is a Thursday at 5 o'clock, and I have Khefa Nosakhere, and he is going to be here to talk to us about his book. I'm excited so that you can meet him because he's wrote 2 amazing books, and we're going to talk about Black masculinity. We're going to talk about racism. We're going to talk about writing, and we're going to learn more about how he's marketing his books. How you doing?
I'm great, Michelle. Glad to be here.
So great. So great to have you. And thank you so much for agreeing to participate in this interview. I'm in New Orleans and you're in New Orleans. And that's a really cool thing because being here and feeling the sun on our faces is so great in the midst of so much that has happened in the city because of COVID and because of just the social injustices that are going on around the world and how it's impacting us here in the South. And it's just so good to have you here to talk about topics that I think are very important. But before we get into the heartbeat of your 2 books, and there are 2 books that we are going to focus on today. One is America the Beautiful 2066. I can't wait to hear about this. And the other is Institutional Racism, where he talks a lot about the characters in Richard Wright's book and Black masculinity. So tell us about yourself and tell us about your books.
Well, I always like to start off by saying that I am a proud native of New Orleans, Louisiana. I attended Francis W. Gregory Junior High School. I graduated from Eleanor McMain, and I am a proud Trojan. I did my undergrad work at the University of Southern California, Fight On. And I have had a lifelong love of literature. Dating back to elementary school, and I owe a tremendous debt of gratitude to Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. And these 2 men were the major architects of Marvel comic books. So before you saw those blockbuster movies, they came from comic books. And most people are very surprised when they hear me say that. But would you believe that there have been studies done that talk about the literary and cultural impact of Marvel comic books, or now it's called the Marvel Universe. But before those movies, those characters were already incredibly popular. Mm-hmm. And so I think back to the Algiers Point Library and Mrs. Lamothe. When I read Lilies of the Field, and I was introduced to the poetry of Langston Hughes, who is my favorite author. So this is just a continuation of my literary journey.
When you talk about Algiers and you talk about places that people here in New Orleans are very familiar with, and I'm sure people who are born here, I'm unfortunately not. I'm from Birmingham, or right outside of Birmingham, a city called Fairfield, Alabama. But I've lived here for 5 years, and I've really enjoyed everything about New Orleans, particularly the culture of it. And as someone who considers themselves creative, being in a city where there is so much creativity at the heart of everything that happens here, it really drives my writing. So it's very good to hear you talk about places that I'm very familiar with, and it's great to have you here. Talk to us about your books. I'm really excited to get in there and to talk about some of the topics that you have touched on in these 2 books. And like I mentioned before, we're going to talk about 2 books. However, there are others, and we'll learn about those as well. But America the Beautiful 2066 will be the first one that we discuss. And then we're going to talk about institutional racism. So talk to us about your works.
So America the Beautiful has a very interesting story. And between 2012 and 2018, I resided in Houston, Texas. And I actually wrote 85% of the manuscript for America the Beautiful while I was recovering from meniscus knee surgery. And basically, America the Beautiful is set 50 years in the future. America is on the brink of collapse. Wall Street has failed, and a Black Army general saves the country. And so I got the, I don't know if I had a singular inspiration for the book. I guess you could just attribute that to my fertile imagination. When we talk about the U.S. wealth gap, when we talk about, you hear about the 1% all the time. Mm-hmm. But I actually did some research in terms of the U.S. population, and the top 10% is the portion of the population that is doing quite well. They have high yearly incomes, multiple vacations, multiple homes. So no one talks about the top 10%. You always hear about the top 1%. And I asked myself, what would happen if the wealth was forcibly redistributed? Mm-hmm. And in a sense, that's what America the Beautiful is about.
Well, tell me something. So connect 2021 with 2066 as you portray it in your book, with everything that's happening around us, from social issues to political issues, all the things that we're facing as African Americans. Connect the two for me. What do you see as similar and what do you see as different?
Well, I have, it's very ironic that you'd ask me that question. I was having a discussion with some friends, and I told them that we are going to see some substantive changes in the United States that deals with, I could throw out a few terms: social justice, redistribution of the wealth. My main point is these things have to happen, and they will be done not because of some great sense of humanity, but because what we live with the internet, it's impossible to keep a secret. Mm-hmm. And what you and I are living through, we're living through an age, a technology age, where the secrets of the past are being shed to light. And the sheer wealth, the incredible wealth in the hands of a very, very small group of people is a very, very dangerous thing. And it's even dangerous for them because what it creates too many who do not have a stake in the United States of America.
That's very true. That's very true. I think so many Black writers of the past, I think about W.E.B. Du Bois, and talking about the talented 10th and, preparing us for that. And a lot of people were against the idea that there would be a talented 10th, that only 10% of the population or 10% would be, will kind of rise to the top in many ways. And I'm sure there are a lot of conversations taking place right now about some of the things that he said, as well as some of the things we've learned over the years between, either bottom up or top down economics. And so there are, there's a lot that we have to take into consideration as we move forward. And we're seeing how social and economic disparities are hurting us as a community in many ways. I mean, there is definitely racism, but I still think the economic gap is where a lot of the pain comes from in many ways, because unfortunately there are a lot of wealthy Black people who can also buy themselves out of some bad situations. But when you're poor, you have so little to move yourself up to do better with, and so it's much harder to change things for yourself. And so it's very good to hear that you're dealing with these things in your book. And your book, it is a novel, correct? It is not a more of an anthropology. It's a novel, correct?
Yes, it's actually a trilogy. And another thing that I would bring to your attention is that if you listen to the lyrics of the song America the Beautiful, oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain across the fruited mountains. I mean, if you listen to the lyrics of that song, you would think that everyone in America is upper middle class or middle class and is well fed, and this is a beautiful place. Well, for 10% it is. But for those families who are living paycheck to paycheck, for the working poor, for the dispossessed, it is not. And so the book, America the Beautiful, there are three, it's a trilogy. I've yet to get to the third book. The first book is America the Beautiful. The second is Amber Waves of Grain. And the third is For Spacious Skies. And so I wanted it to be a parody to point out the gross chasm between the haves and the have-nots, and how dangerous that is. I heard a wise man say that the greatest enemy, the most dangerous enemy that you could face is someone who has nothing to lose. You don't want to face that type of enemy.
That's true. That is very true. Love what you're saying. I just want to stop right now and tell everybody to please drop us your comments. We are here to answer questions from you as well. So you can drop those on the Facebook page if we can see them. And also, if you're on StreamYard, I can see them first and foremost if you drop them on StreamYard. But if you put those on Facebook, we will also answer them. If we don't answer them at this point, we will definitely get to them after our session. So we have an amazing writer here talking about his books. We're going to cover two of those books. One is America the Beautiful 2066, and the other is Institutional Racism. For America the Beautiful 2066, tell me something. Tell the readers this. What did you learn about yourself in writing this book?
Well, when people find out that you are an author, I get the same 2 or 3 questions most of the time. And the main question that I get is, where did you find the time? What was your motivation? And as I gave it some thought, the same thing kept coming back. And the answer to that question is, I was sick and tired of not being published. And I have a colleague in Houston. I also told her I'd hit rock bottom, and she would crack up when I told her that. And it's just I learned that I had a burning desire to be published. And ironically, my surgery was an opportunity for me to begin the process in terms of putting the manuscript together. I made all of the classic mistakes that a new author makes in 2016. So I learned that I am more resilient than even I gave myself credit for. Mm-hmm. I've always considered myself, as the oldest of 4 from a single female-headed household. I define myself as one who overcame great obstacles. And so becoming an author is not something for the meek, mm-hmm. The criticism, editorials, you got to have a thick skin in order to navigate the literary world. So I learned that, you know, if I'm going to have a part of the conversation, I have to bring something valuable, something that our young people need to hear, something our people need for this time and place on our journey.
That's excellent. That's excellent. And so you are a teacher by trade, right? Have a history of being a teacher, teaching our young people, and
Yes.
you're continuing to teach through your books. And I 100% agree with you on how tough it is to publish. It's not just tough to get published, which is something that, self-publishing can somewhat make easier, but much harder to do from a traditional perspective. But it is also tough to find that place within yourself where you're comfortable exposing so much about you and yourself to the world, because the world is not always going to be kind.
No.
And so I think that's something that people who don't write may not know, that as writers, we go through a very serious process of deciding whether or not we could actually deal with and handle the criticism that is going to come because of the work. You can have people who are going to criticize you just because. It's not that you're not good at what you do. It's because I know him. That's my boy from the hood. There's no way he can write a book. And that happens to all of us, trust me. Or family who says, I know, she's good at what she's good at this or good at that, but I don't think she could write a book. So you'll have people who come at you and have low expectations. And so when they see that you can do it, it feels good, but it's very hard to get there. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about institutional racism, which I think is something very timely for what we're going through right now. The fact that you've put this book out, and tell me, when did you release the book, Institutional Racism? I want to get the full title because I feel like I'm not doing you any justice by not giving the full title. So you do that for me, if you don't mind.
So the full title was Institutional Racism and the Search for African American Masculinity and Identity in Selected Works of Richard Wright. And it was published, I believe, in March of 2020.
Excellent. March of 2020, when we became homebound because of COVID.
Yeah.
You are dropping a book. I dropped my second book in February of 2020. And when the world shut down, I thought, I am not going to sell a copy because I could not get out there and market myself like I did with my first book. Right. And so I know what that felt like, to think I'm going to release this book in the midst of what's happening. And everybody says, well, everybody's reading right now. Well, a lot of people are. And it's books like yours that I think really were pushed up to the top because it's talking about racism, an issue that, although has impacted us for hundreds of years, has for some reason become a major issue for corporations and politicians and communities since the murder of George Floyd. Mm-hmm. And so let's talk about Richard Wright. Let's talk about institutional racism. And I can tell you, I am a huge fan of Richard Wright and was very excited to talk to you about your work and what you discovered about yourself in writing about him. So tell us a little bit about this book and what inspired you to write it.
Well, I came across a fascinating story that I try to share as often as possible. I believe it was last year when I Am Not Your Negro came out. And James Baldwin has enjoyed an incredible renaissance of his work. But what most people do not know is that Richard Wright was his mentor. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm going to throw out three names, and you can't top these names. And this is a true story. Langston Hughes called Richard Wright and told him about a 24-year-old writer named James Baldwin. That really happened. Okay. Mm-hmm. And that's good stuff, you know. And Langston Hughes told Richard Wright, listen, there's this really talented young man. And by the way, Langston is having this discussion with Richard Wright because when Native Son was published in 1940, Richard Wright became an international star. He was arguably the most important Black man in America in 1940. And I draw a parallel. What Jackie Robinson did on the baseball diamond in 1947, Richard Wright did 7 years earlier in the world of literature. Native Son was a tremendous success. It was a Book of the Month Club selection. It was a blockbuster. Okay, and what made Native Son unique in the Black experience is that if you were to understand the dialogue and what white scholars said about Black folk, was that we did not have the mental capacity to understand our lives. We were hewers of wood, like the good book says. We were beasts of burden. And so when Native Son came along, the first scene is set in the projects in a small tenement with human beings cramped together, and a large rat comes out, and Bigger has to kill the rat with a skillet. Okay, that smashed the hell out of that lie that we were content. And so I found myself reflecting, and the reason why that this title is so long is because this was my original master's thesis. And one day I said to myself, this is too good for no one else to see it besides one professor. So I decided to expand, and I decided that this would be my first nonfiction book. My second nonfiction book, the title is Charmed, I'm Sure, The Black Male's Guide to Success in America. And that book is a tie-in in terms of, Black masculinity. And that's something very personal to me, growing up in a single female-headed household in a city with the #1 murder rate in the country. So it was something that subject, Black masculinity, is something very, very personal to me.
But let's stop right there, because I wanted to ask that you define Black masculinity and what makes it different from white masculinity.
Well, the short answer to your first question, Black masculinity is a title that is earned after successful passage of a rites of passage for a Black male. And this comes from the motherland, where a rites of passage was a part of our culture before slavery destroyed our culture. So, that's Black masculinity in a nutshell. What makes Black masculinity different from white masculinity? Well, we could talk a long time about that, but the short answer to that question is the history. Dr. Jawanzikan Jufu is, I think he had the best definition of Blackness I've ever heard, and he calls it the 3 C's, and that means color, consciousness, and culture. So the history, I hate to use these terms, but they are apropos. You have the oppressor and the oppressed. And many health professionals, psychiatrists, psychologists, scholars talk about the impact that oppression has on a people. and how that shapes their worldview and how the world sees us. And so in this instance, how Black men are seen. And if you were to go to Google and type in Black masculinity, you'd be surprised at what comes up. And now what comes up is hypermasculinity and homosexuality.
Mm.
And the question that we as Black people have to ask is, who's responsible for that? It ain't us. So my work, my platform is about Black men defining Black masculinity.
Mm.
If I wanted authentic Korean cuisine, I want someone from Korea to fix it. If I want to know about Dutch culture, I need to go to that part of the world. But when we talk about Black men or Black culture, there is a disconnect because of the history.
Mm-hmm.
Southern scholars have a popular nickname for slavery, American slavery, and that popular nickname is called the peculiar institution. And the reason that it is called the peculiar institution is because servitude has been around probably since the beginning of humanity. But what was different about what happened to our ancestors is that for the first time, we were told you were ugly. You are less because of the melanin in your skin, because of your thick lips and your nose. This is the first in human history. And we still suffer from that. That never changed. So over the years, we are told to forget slavery. We are told, that was how many hundred years ago? But I have never heard anyone say that about the Holocaust. And you will never hear that. So we as a people need to be the stewards of our future. We need to be the gatekeepers of our culture, and we need to define ourselves. Black women need to define themselves and their struggle. Black men need to define our struggle and ourselves, and we need to have some type of common ground so that, we are not fighting each other, which, would benefit a group that we do not want to benefit.
I agree. I think that something that struck me during this case against Chauvin was that in this courtroom, which I watched every day of it, because I was so fascinated with how it was going to be, how George Floyd would be portrayed. The goal, it felt like, to me watching it, was that there had to be proof that he was a real man. That's what the trial seemed to be focused on. We can win this if we can get the people, the jurors, the judge, the lawyers, or whomever, to see him as a man. And that bothered me greatly, that seemed to be the task, that a lot of the talk was about that he was a father, that he was a friend, he had a girlfriend, all these different things. And I felt like that is a big difference between Black masculinity and white masculinity. Is first, we have to prove that we're valuable, and that does go back to slavery without a doubt. So thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. Let's talk about Richard Wright. And I know in this book you talk about many characters in several of his books, and you are absolutely right. For those of you out there, I want you to go and read a Richard Wright novel. Start with Native Son. It is so important to help you define and understand who you are and all the challenges and things that you face as an African American, but also the things that he witnessed and noticed and felt compelled to write about in 1940. You got to think about that. Like you said, 1940, he was one of the most celebrated writers of that time. And he still is a celebrated writer. But my question to you is, what was it about Bigger Thomas and his character that was different from some of the characters in the other Richard Wright books that you talked about in your book? What made him stand out, and why did you feel like he was someone that needed to drive the conversation in your book around institutional racism? And feel free to talk about the book as detailed as possible, because I think people need to know what this book is about.
So Richard Wright himself spoke often about how he created Bigger. And by the way, Bigger, he picked Bigger because it rhymes with nigger.
Mm-hmm.
He did that on purpose. Bigger had no education. Bigger was trapped in the concrete jungles of Chicago. In Soul on Ice, Eldridge Cleaver said that Bigger was in full rebellion against a system that he could not understand.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so Bigger, unfortunately, Richard Wright said that there's Bigger Thomas is alive today. He's standing on a corner, he's, there are too many Bigger Thomases. And is it because we are lazy? Is it because we are shiftless? No, it's because there is a system in place that takes the tax base out of the urban city. The urban centers have failing school systems, and too many Black men and Black women, for that matter, are targeted. And if you come from, if you have an inferior education, you will have jobs. And I tell my students, job stands for just over broke. You're living a life that is not something that you would want your children to have. And this is proven through generational poverty. Mm-hmm. Next to great wealth, there's great poverty. And so, so getting back to Bigger is every man, unfortunately. Without giving away the entire story, Bigger did not know how to interact with the wealthy, quote unquote, liberal whites that he worked for. This was done on purpose too, to show his lack of interpersonal skills, his lack, and I hate to say it, his lack of humanity. So even to modern day audiences, so much can be learned from Bigger in terms of his deficiencies. Mm-hmm. Even though he wanted better, but the world or the picture that Richard Wright painted was so powerful that we are talking about it today. Therefore, Bigger is a foundational character, one of the most important characters, not in Black literature, but in American literature, because Bigger is a result of the things that didn't happen in 1865 that should have happened. Mm-hmm. And by that, I mean reparations. And I always say that when you look at slavery, there's only one group of people who are in America against their will, and that's us. And I always say, if you look at what was done to us, if you compare our ancestors in West Africa and the kidnapping and our subsequent dehumanization, I always say that an unlimited amount of time and resources went into making us chattel. But after the Civil War, there was very little effort to make us whole. And we are still dealing with everything that you mentioned. Every problem in Black America is a direct result of that. Mm-hmm. And so, and we are beginning to have these conversations, because you cannot have a conversation about anything wrong in the Black community without ultimately arriving at the root of the problem. And the root of the problem started with an assassin's bullet when John Wilkes Booth shot Abraham Lincoln. And so most people don't know that President Andrew Johnson was from Kentucky. He was an ignorant, racist man. And there certainly would be no land for the Black man and the Black woman. And that Lincoln's assassination, as he is referred to as the last casualty of the Civil War, set us on the path that we are on right now.
We could talk about this for hours. I tell you that it's so good to hear you talk about institutional racism in the midst of everything that's happening in our country. It's late in the game. I mean, we know it's late. It's remarkable how many people are acting as if, this is something that's just showed up in the last year. I don't know. I guess because we've been all stuck at home, people have just realized that institutional racism and systemic racism exists, but it has been here for hundreds and hundreds of years. And it's good to see an African-American man really addressing these issues. And without giving away the story, a native son, I think it's important, though, that that people who are listening, for me, to understand the importance of your book and the fact that you're looking at Richard Wright, a man in the 1940s who was writing about what I call is causation, cause and effect. A young Black man who is impacted by things he don't even understand. He commits a murder. He commits 2 murders, actually. And one is a mistake and one apparently is not. However, his existence, the way he lives in deep poverty. I grew up public housing, working class community. I'm not, I get it. I see it. I understand it. But you couldn't change his path was almost laid out for him
from birth. Yeah.
Yeah. And Richard Wright in the 1940s saw the importance of putting this on paper because he needed everyone to understand that pain. And in the Black Writers Workspace, so just a couple of weeks ago, we had a session on writing through the pain. And we talked about the fact that there are still so many people who feel like Black writers write too much about pain. I hear it all the time. Why there aren't more books or more stories or more movies about uplifting things? Why we got to hear about slavery and these period pieces? And I get it. It can be a little exhausting. But also, a lot of us are dealing with a great deal of pain that stems from generations and generations before. And so when I talk to writers and I get to hear your stories and I get to learn from you, what I normally hear, there's this theme of using writing therapeutically to deal with issues that are serious and that are existing now. So it's good to hear that you are doing that and that you're using someone who has really built an amazing platform, in my opinion. That's Richard Wright and some of the things that he put out into the world. So James Baldwin said that there is a bigger Thomas in all of us in many ways.
Yeah.
And so that's something else that we will, at some point, I'm going to bring you back so we can just talk about Richard Wright the whole time. But for now, we're 40 minutes in, and I wanted to hear a little bit about your publishing and your marketing of your book. Are your books self-published or traditionally published or vanity published?
Actually, they are self-published, and I'll tell you why. A lot of people are surprised when I tell them that if, say, for instance, Random House published my book, you ever wonder, how you hear about Ronald Isley and Toni Braxton being broke? Like they had all those hits, but they're broke. And this is what happens. In the instance that they do not write those songs, they perform them. They don't own the rights to the songs. That's where the money is. The money is in the publishing. I tell my students the money is behind the camera, not in front.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so for that reason, I did my research, and I had a lot of work in terms of building my author platform. In September, I'm releasing Charmed, I'm Sure, The Black Male's Guide to Success in America. And I'm also releasing, I'm launching my podcast, The Masculine Intellectual. Mm-hmm. And so what I put out into the universe is this. Whatever success that I get will be directed to the uplift of Black males growing up in single female-headed households. So when I was a youth, I did not get specific knowledge. I didn't get resources. What I got was work hard. And I got to a point where I asked myself, what the hell does that mean? For who? Right? No one has worked harder than Black folks. Mm-hmm. And that has made whites, Asians, and Arabs rich, not us. And there are there's reasons for that. So we need to understand those things. We need to change our diets. We need to change our thoughts. We need to change our names. We need to change our spirituality. We need to truly re-embrace our culture. And that's really is what's going to save us.
You are on it. I totally agree. I think that for myself, I started the Black Writers Workspace last year because I just wanted to connect with Black writers. Did not think it was going to do anything more than pull in about 100 people that that may want to talk to me from time to time. We're over 4,200 writers, and everyone, what I love about everyone is that we stand behind our decision to be self-published for those who decided to self-publish for all the same reason in many ways. One is we want to own what we have, and we understand that there is value in that. So thank you for talking about that. But also, there is a need for an upliftment in our community in so many ways. And I'm glad to hear you say that you're speaking out for men who grew up in, like you, with a single mom. I grew up with a single mom as well, 4 kids living in public housing. And the same thing, I wanted to be a writer. Nobody was a writer in my world. I wanted to be an entrepreneur. The only entrepreneurs I knew were beauticians and barbers who we all thought owned their shops, but now we look back and think maybe they didn't. Mm-hmm. And in my neighborhood, I grew up across the street from a historically Black college. There was a little store called Turner's, and it was owned by a Black family, husband and wife. And it was probably about 1,500 square feet. It may not even been that big. Mm-hmm. Go in there and buy your eggs, and you can buy your candy. And when I saw Black people own a little grocery store, it changed how I saw myself, because now I knew I could do a little bit more. I could do more and go after something bigger. I wanted to be an entrepreneur, and I ultimately became that. And so it's good to hear that you're speaking to a group of people that needs to be spoke to. I hate to almost hear people call us marginalized, but there are, we are marginalized in many ways. But I'm just happy to hear that you're saying, look, I came out of this, you can too. Mm-hmm. And that's what these books and everything that I do is going to be about. So thank you so much. I'm going to let you have the last word first to say something to those writers out there who are afraid to maybe talk about social, political, or religious issues in their books for fear that someone is not going to like it. Speak to them and give them some encouraging words. And then secondly, I would love for you to tell us how we can buy your books.
So, I guess my words of encouragement would be this. If you look around America, there's so much nonsense that gets tremendous exposure. And anything worthwhile, anything uplifting has an uphill battle So in that regard, we desperately need to hear the truth about what happened to us. We need to hear who we really are. So many of our people do not know what happened and labor under tremendous misinformation and lies. They do not know of the great Black civilizations. They don't know the true history of the world. And I had the tremendous honor of meeting Dr. Yusuf Ben Yakanan, who's considered one of our greatest scholars. I sat at the feet of our great scholars, Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, Dr. John Howard Clark. I would just say to any Black author who wants to write about something quote unquote controversial, it's needed. It's needed and necessary, and do it.
Excellent. Excellent. Now tell us how we can buy your books.
So, as I was telling you earlier, my producer and I have a little inside joke. Google me, Khefa Nosakhere, KhefaNosakhere. All of my books can be found on Amazon. My bio, my videos throughout the years. I'm on Goodreads. My students over the years have Googled me, and they're like, "Oh wow, we've got not many high school teachers have a published author."
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to share something, Michelle, from the book. This is my favorite poem. It was written in 1922, and we talked about our community. We talked about some substantive issues, and I'd like to share this with the viewers. This this poem is called "Tired" by Fenton Johnson. It was written in 1922, and in my humble opinion, out of everything I've ever read, this poem. I was 18 years old when I first heard it. I was taking an African American literature class with my favorite professor, Dr. Isaac Brumfield, Eloquent Gentleman. I wrote a poem for him called "The Eloquent Gentleman," and this is "Tired" by Fenton Johnson. I am tired of work. I am tired of building up somebody else's civilization. Let's take a rest, Miss Lizzie Jane. I will go down to the Last Chance Saloon, drink a gallon or two of gin, shoot a game or two of dice, and sleep the rest of the night on one of Mike's barrels. You will let the old shanty go to rot, the white people's clothes turn to dust, and the Calvary Baptist Church sink to the bottomless pit. You will spend your days forgetting you married me, and your nights hunting the warm gin Mike serves the ladies in the rear of the Last Chance Saloon. Throw the children into the river. Civilization has given us too many. It is better to die than it is to grow up and find out that you are colored. Pluck the stars out of the heavens. The stars mark our destiny. The stars mark my destiny. I am tired of civilization.
I think we have to pause for that, because that speaks to so many of us. It speaks to so many of us. Thank you for that. I really appreciate it. It just brings me back to a place when, all I read was literature from that period and even before. I'm not a contemporary reader. I hate to say that, but I'm not. I grew up on Richard Wright and Dick Gregory and Alex Haley and Maya, and wow, it's very good to. I've never heard that poem before, but I'm going to look it up. But it's so true. It is so true. I think many of us in this culture, in this community, this Black community, we are tired. We are very tired. And for him to have written that, you said in the 1920s,
1922. Imagine, I tell my kids all the time, imagine being black in 1922.
Right.
Imagine that. If you looked at a white woman, they could lynch you. I mean, when I know you've heard the story when a white couple was coming down the sidewalk, we had to step off. I mean, by the way, Richard Wright was born in 1908 on Rucker Plantation, Mississippi, right outside of Natchez. 1908.
He's a private writer. I didn't know that. So that's very good to know.
Well, so when he left Mississippi, his story is unique. He has no college degree. He basically had to leave school after the 8th grade. And a lot of people don't know that. You never would think that reading his work. And when I was a teenager and I would read, by the way, I would be remiss if I did not mention his greatest short story, The Man Who Lived Underground. I strongly go, you yourself, read that story tonight. The Man Who Lived Underground. I talk about Fred Daniels, who was a regular working guy, who was apprehended by 3 white cops, and they beat him into a false murder confession, and he escapes in the sewers beneath the city. It's an incredible story that is foundational to American literature, to the intellectual, certainly my intellectual, and again, who introduced me to The Man Who Lived Underground? Dr. Isaac Brumfield. The prose, The Man Who Lived Underground is compared to Les Miserables, and Dostoevsky. There's a line in it, sister, where there's a dead baby, and it says, and his fists were clenched in protest, and I just sent chills down my spine. Okay, so the Man Who Lived Underground.
I've got to read that.
You've got tonight. I need you to read it tonight. And
I will totally do that.
It's going to have a tremendous impact on your spirit. I'm telling you, right? So, and the way that Fred Daniels is killed will remind you of Freddie Gray. It's a parallel. Okay, and it was in his book. He had a book of short stories called 8 Men. But I can name certain. So I share with you a poem, "Tired." The Man Who Lived Underground. There are slave narratives. Black literature that shaped my intellectual path. That just gave me comfort in a world, in a country geared to my conscious and subconscious destruction. And so, I had to be aware of that and take my education and tailor it to me. And I was very fortunate to grow up in New Orleans, in a city where most of the people look like me. And I had, my early teachers were Black women who loved me, and being an adult, and I look back on that, is something that I'm very, very grateful for, because when I went to college in Los Angeles, one of my dear friends, or dear classmate, Cliff Blevins, he once said, Black students in California grow up in white communities. They don't know nothing about Black history. Then they come to USC and they meet Kef. And that was a tremendous compliment in terms of, and that he was saying that I was a standard as such. So not only literature, but Black culture for me has just been a lifelong love affair. I had mentioned some scholars. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Dr. Sheikh Anta Diop, who was an expert on pre-colonial Black Africa. Dr. Chancellor Williams, I could go on and on. We as a people need to buy these books from Black bookstores and understand that when we talk about the human family, every member of the human family has had a period of their lives that they would rather not talk about.
Mm-hmm.
Black people, people of African descent, created tremendous civilizations first. It's just that our time was 500. So the time that you and I would not want to talk about, it's now, unfortunately. But there's a small group of people who know what we accomplished,
mm-hmm.
and have gone through tremendous effort to hide that. But now everything is coming to light. And so it's actually a great time, a wonderful time to be alive, to see how the civilization of people of African descent is coming, what we accomplish is coming to light. And everything that you see happening in the United States, everything that they're doing in terms of killing us in broad daylight on camera is bringing about the day that they fear the most. Isn't that ironic? Mm-hmm. So you've heard that saying, before things get better, they have to get worse. And that's what we're seeing. So half hour after the Derek Chauvin verdict was announced, Miss Bryant was shot and killed, 4 shots. So you're a grown man and you can't disable a teenager with a knife. I mean, so we hear the term police brutality. We can't use that term anymore, and this is why. So they used to beat the hell out of us. Now they're killing us. So that ain't brutality. That's we can't call that brutality. We have to call it something else. And so what you will see is sweeping change in terms of how police, those who go into the police departments across the country, are vetted. I've seen some countries where it takes up to 2 years before you can become a police officer. There's some countries where police officers don't carry guns. Mm-hmm. We're going to see tremendous change because of Tamir Rice, because of Sandra Bland, because of too many names that you and I know. Mm-hmm. Too many.
Entirely too many. And I'm glad you brought it up. Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a great place to kind of close out, but I am hopeful that we see this change, because we need to see this change. It's time. And when you read that poem, Tired, I thought about Floyd. I thought about this case. I really did. I thought, and because the celebration to me was not, a celebration like it's a birthday party or New Year's. It was a celebration of, I'm tired, and maybe this will give me just a little bit more of the power, the energy to keep fighting. That's what it felt like. It was the I'm tired celebration. I'm so tired, but you just gave me a little bit of something to help me to move forward. And so I'm glad that you brought that up. We have 2 comments and we're going to close out. They're both from Albert Mann, who said that poem was everything. And it absolutely was. And he also said, thanks again for another amazing and informative live stream. So he's someone who follows us. And for those of you out there who didn't get a chance to post your questions, we're going to bring back this amazing author at some point and talk to him more about his work. I could talk for hours about it, but we have already topped an hour. This is the longest interview I've had. But it was so insightful. And thank you so much for sharing and being open and honest with us. I'm grateful to know that you're right here in the city with me and sharing all this great news and all your greatness with the people here in New Orleans, which is an amazing city in itself. So thank you so much for being with us. And I look forward to continuing to have this conversation with you, if maybe offline, maybe coffee at some point.
Absolutely. I would love
Yeah, that would be excellent. And I'm definitely going to read the books or the short story that you mentioned from Wright. But for now, we're going to close out. Thank you so much. If you can just wait for me, I'm going to talk to you one-on-one, but I wanted to speak to everyone here and just want to officially close out this interview. So thank you so much.
Pleasure. It was my pleasure, sister.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I know we've had a long interview, but it was so insightful, and I hope that you will take some time to review it. We will have it on YouTube, clips of it on Instagram, and of course, you can view it on Facebook on the Black Writers Workspace page, as well as my author Michelle D. Jackson page. We have a couple of amazing things coming up. We have the Chapter 1 writing competition, and we ask everyone to apply for that competition. The deadline is May 1st. You can win $500 for the best writing non-fiction or fiction, or $250 for poetry. And we do invite you to participate. We also hosted a Pen Posse Roundtable last Saturday on what good writers do best, and the panel was amazing. I hope you can find that link. If you cannot, go to my YouTube channel, Michelle Jackson, and you can review that 2-hour roundtable. We put out so many great tips on how to become a great writer. But as for now, we want to thank you again and just ask that you continue to stay with us as we interview our authors from week to week. We will continue to do this. We're going to take a break in May, and then we'll be back in June with more writers, more editors, more publishers. And if you're interested in being interviewed, you can always DM me or DM Michaela Brown, actually, and let her know that you're interested, and we'll be sure to try to get you on the screen. Goodbye for now.